In a small, run-down diner on the outskirts of New York City, life moved at its own unhurried pace. The kind of place where the coffee was always too strong, the fries were just a little greasy, and people came not for fine dining, but for comfort food that didn't ask questions. This was Maya's world, a world of long hours, endless chores, and dreams tucked away in the corners of her mind. Maya Patel had been working as a waitress here since she turned 18. She wasn't old enough to have seen much of life beyond these four walls, yet her eyes carried a weight far heavier than her years. Her mother, Priya, had fallen ill a few years ago, and medical bills piled up faster than they could pay them off. So Maya worked day shifts at the diner and night shifts cleaning offices downtown, doing whatever it took to keep their tiny apartment from crumbling under debt. The diner wasn't glamorous, but it had character. There was the jukebox in the corner that rarely worked, the cracked vinyl seats patched together with duct tape, and the smell of fried onions wafting through the air no matter what time of day it was. It was home in a way, loud, messy, imperfect, but familiar. Most days Maya didn't mind the chaos. She liked chatting with regular customers, hearing snippets of their lives while refilling coffee cups or dropping off plates of pancakes. But tonight felt different. Something about the atmosphere seemed charged, like the calm before a storm. It started when he walked in. He wasn't someone you'd expect to see in a place like this. Everything about him screamed money. The tailored suit, the polished leather, shoes, the Rolex glinting faintly under the dim light. He looked out of place among the faded posters advertising half-price burgers and soda deals. Yet there he was, striding confidently toward a booth near the window, his presence commanding attention without effort. Maya watched him from behind the counter, curiosity tugging at her thoughts. Who was this man? What brought him to their little diner? Wealthy people usually stuck to high-end restaurants or private clubs, not dingy joints like this one. Still, business was business, so she grabbed a notepad and approached him with a polite smile. "Hi, welcome to Joe's Diner," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "Can I get you something?" The man glanced up, his piercing gaze meeting hers briefly before returning to the menu. "Just a black coffee for now," he replied, his tone clipped but courteous. Maya nodded and jotted down the order, stealing another quick look at him. Up close, he seemed older than she'd first thought, maybe late 40s or early 50s, but his sharp features gave him an air of authority. His dark hair was streaked with silver, and lines etched around his eyes hinted at years spent making tough decisions. Despite his polished appearance, there was a hint of weariness in his expression, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. She returned a few minutes later with his coffee, setting the steaming cup carefully on the table. As he reached into his pocket to pull out his wallet, something caught her eye. It wasn't the wallet itself. It was old and worn, unlike everything else about him, but rather what slipped out of it as he opened it to pay. A photograph fluttered onto the floor, landing face up beside his shoe. Maya bent down instinctively to pick it up, intending to hand it back without a second thought. But then she froze. The woman in the picture. She knew her. It was her mother, Priya. Smiling brightly against a backdrop of vibrant flowers, looking younger and happier than Maya had ever seen her. For a moment, all sound faded. The clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, even the ticking clock on the wall. All Maya could focus on was the image in her hand, staring back at her like a ghost from the past. Her heart raced as she straightened up, clutching the photo tightly. "Sir?" she began hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly. "Why is my mother's picture in your wallet?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy and loaded with implications. The man froze mid-motion, his fingers still gripping the wallet. Slowly, he raised his head to meet her gaze, surprise flickering across his face. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The diner buzzed around them, oblivious to the tension crackling at this lone table. Finally, the man cleared his throat and gestured for her to sit. "Let me explain," he said quietly, his tone softening. And as Maya slid into the seat across from him, clutching the photograph like a lifeline, she braced herself for answers she hadn't known she needed. "Little Did she know? This chance encounter would unravel secrets buried deep in her family's past and change her life forever. The diner grew quieter around them, though the hum of chatter and clinking dishes still lingered in the background. Maya sat across from the man, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if it might steady her racing thoughts. The photograph lay between them like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, familiar yet foreign, comforting yet unsettling. The man took a deep breath, his sharp eyes softening as he stared at the picture. For a moment he seemed lost in another time, another place. Then with a sigh he began to speak. "My name is Adrian," he said, his voice low and measured. "I've lived many lives since I last saw your mother, but some memories never fade. That photo—" He paused, reaching out to gently touch the corner of the image. "It's a reminder of someone who meant more to me than I could ever put into words." Maya blinked, her mind struggling to catch up. "You knew my mom?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How?" Adrian leaned back in his seat, his gaze distant as he started to recount a story that felt like it belonged to another world. "Your mother and I grew up together in a small village in India," he explained. "We were inseparable as children, best friends, partners in mischief, dreamers with big plans for the future. Back then, life was simple. We didn't have much, but we had each other." He smiled faintly at the memory, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the tabletop. Priya was extraordinary. She had this spark, this energy, that made everyone around her feel alive. We talked about everything, our dreams, our fears, the kind of lives we wanted to lead. She wanted to travel the world, see new places, experience things most people only read about. And I wanted to be by her side through all of it. Maya listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mother had rarely spoken about her childhood or the life she'd left behind. To hear someone describe her like this, so full of hope and ambition, was both beautiful and heartbreaking. But things changed, Adrian continued, his tone growing heavier. When I turned 18, my family moved to America so I could pursue better opportunities. At first, Priya and I stayed in touch. Letters, phone calls, promises to meet again someday. But over time, life got in the way. My studies, my career, they consumed me. And eventually we lost contact. His words hung in the air, tinged with regret. Years later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Priya had married someone else and started a family. By then, I was building my own life here in the US, running a company, trying to make something of myself. I told myself it was for the best, that she deserved happiness even if it wasn't with me. Maya's throat tightened as she processed what he was saying. This man, the stranger sitting across from her, had once been deeply connected to her mother. A part of her felt betrayed, almost angry that her mom had kept such a significant chapter of her life hidden. But another part of her couldn't help but feel curious, drawn to the fragments of a story she'd never known existed. "So you kept this photo all these years?" she asked finally, her voice steadier now. "Why?" Adrian hesitated, his expression conflicted. "Because it reminded me of who I used to be," he admitted. "Before success, before wealth, before everything became so complicated. Looking at Priya's face brought me back to a time when life felt pure, untainted. It reminded me of the person I loved, and the person I lost." There was a long silence after that, broken only by the occasional clink of silverware in the distance. Maya stared at him, searching his face for any sign of dishonesty or exaggeration. But all she saw was sincerity, a raw vulnerability that mirrored her own confusion. Finally, she spoke. "My mom never mentioned you," she said softly. "Not once. She hardly ever talked about her past, actually. Whenever I asked, she'd just smile and say it wasn't important anymore. Do you think she regretted letting you go?" Adrian exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of her question. "I don't know," he admitted. "And maybe that's something I'll always wonder about. But what I do know is that Priya made choices out of love, for herself, for her family, for you. If she chose not to dwell on the past, it was probably because she wanted to focus on the present, on giving you the best life she could. Tears pricked at the corners of Maya's eyes as she absorbed his words. She thought about her mother, the sacrifices she'd made, the illnesses she'd endured, the countless nights she'd spent worrying about bills while still finding ways to laugh and sing and make their tiny apartment feel like home. Maybe Adrian was right. Maybe her mom had chosen to let go of the past so she could fully embrace the future, but there was still one nagging question lingering in Maya's mind, one she wasn't sure she was ready to ask. Taking a shaky breath, she forced herself to say it aloud. Do you think my mom ever missed you, even after she married my dad?" Adrian's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, he looked like he might cry. "I'd like to believe she did," he said quietly. "Not because I want to undo the life she built, but because I want to believe that the love we shared mattered. That it shaped her, even if only in small ways." They sat there for a while longer, the silence stretching between them like an unspoken understanding. Maya realized she'd come to this diner expecting nothing more than another ordinary shift, another mundane night serving coffee and taking orders. Instead, she'd stumbled upon a piece of her mother's soul, a fragment of her history that no one had ever dared to share. As Adrian reached for his wallet to pay for his coffee, Maya found herself asking one final question. "What happens now?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. "After tonight, I mean." Adrian looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "That depends on you," he replied. "If you want answers, if you want to know more about your mother's past, I'm willing to help. But only if it's what you want. Not for me, not for anyone else, just for you." Maya nodded slowly, her heart heavy with emotion but also strangely lighter, as if a door she hadn't known was closed had suddenly creaked open. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. The days that followed their meeting at the diner were a blur for Maya. Her mind buzzed with questions, memories, and emotions she didn't know how to process. She replayed every word Adrian had said, dissecting his tone, his expressions, the way he'd looked at her mother's photograph like it was a treasure too precious to let go of. And yet, despite the whirlwind inside her, there was a strange sense of clarity, a pull toward uncovering the truth about her mother's past. Adrian called her the next day, just as he'd promised. His voice on the phone was calm but tinged with hesitation, as if he wasn't sure how much of himself to reveal. "Maya," he began, "I understand this is overwhelming for you. I don't want to intrude or make things more complicated than they already are. But if you're ready, I'd like to help you learn more about your mom, about who she was before everything." Maya hesitated only for a moment before agreeing. How could she say no? This was her chance to step into a part of her mother's life she'd never known existed, to see her not just as a parent, but as a person with dreams, secrets, and a history far richer than Maya had imagined. Their first stop was a small town, in India, the same village where Adrian and Priya had grown up. It wasn't easy arranging the trip. Maya had to juggle work shifts and save every penny she could spare, while Adrian handled logistics from his end. Despite the challenges, the anticipation kept her going. Every night, she lay awake imagining what she might discover, stories her mother had never told, places she'd once called home, people who still remembered her laugh. When they finally arrived, the village felt like stepping back in time. The streets were narrow and dusty, lined with colorful stalls selling spices, fabrics, and handmade trinkets. Children played barefoot in the alleys, their laughter echoing through the air. Old women sat outside their homes, chatting animatedly as they sorted lentils or mended clothes. It was nothing like the bustling city Maya had grown up in, and yet it felt oddly familiar, as if some part of her recognized it deep down. Adrian led her to a modest house tucked away behind a cluster of mango trees. Its walls were painted a faded blue and vines crept up the sides, giving it a weathered charm. As they approached, an elderly woman emerged from the doorway, squinting against the sunlight. When she saw Adrian, her face lit up with recognition. "Adrian!" she exclaimed, her voice warm and welcoming. "Is that really you?" He smiled, stepping forward to greet her. "Yes, Auntie Mira. It's been too long." Mira turned her gaze to Maya, studying her with curious eyes. "And who is this lovely young lady?" she asked, her tone kind but probing. "This is Maya," Adrian replied. "Priya's daughter." The mention of her mother's name seemed to strike a chord in Mira. Her expression softened, and for a moment she simply stared at Maya, as if seeing a ghost from the past. Then, without warning, tears welled up in her eyes. "You look so much like her," she whispered, pulling Maya into a tight embrace. "So much like my Priya." For Maya, it was surreal. She had spent her entire life knowing her mother as a quiet, hard-working woman who rarely spoke about herself. But here, surrounded by these strangers-turned-family, she realized her mom had once been someone else entirely, a vibrant, spirited girl with dreams bigger than the sky. Over the next few days, Mira shared countless stories about Priya's childhood. She talked about how Priya used to climb trees faster than any boy in the neighborhood, how she'd sneak out at night to stargaze with Adrian, how she dreamed of becoming a teacher and traveling the world. Each story painted a picture of a woman Maya barely recognized, and yet she couldn't help but feel proud. One afternoon, while rummaging through an old trunk in Mira's attic, Maya stumbled upon a bundle of letters tied neatly with a ribbon. They were addressed to Adrian, written in her mother's delicate handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened the first one, her eyes scanning the words. "Dear Adrian," it began. "I hope this letter finds her safe and happy. I miss you, more than I can say, but I also know that our paths have taken us in different directions. Life here is changing quickly, and though I try to hold on to the dreams we once shared, sometimes it feels like they're slipping away." Maya read the rest in silence, her heart aching with each sentence. These weren't just letters. They were windows into her mother's soul, glimpses of a love that had endured even after distance and time had torn them apart. As the days passed, Maya and Adrian visited other parts of the village, meeting friends and relatives who still remembered Priya fondly. Everyone had something to share, a memory, a joke, a piece of advice she'd given them years ago. Slowly but surely, Maya began piecing together a portrait of her mother that felt both foreign and deeply personal. But amidst all the nostalgia, a question lingered in her mind, one she hadn't dared to voice until now. One evening, as they sat together under the stars near the riverbank, she finally worked up the courage to ask. "Adrian," she began, her voice hesitant, "do you think my mom ever regretted leaving this place? Leaving you?" Adrian sighed, staring at the water rippling under the moonlight. "I don't know," he admitted. "But if she did, she never showed it. Priya was strong, Maya. Stronger than anyone I've ever known. She made choices, not because they were easy, but because they were right. For her family, for her future, for you. That's the kind of person she was." Maya nodded, blinking back tears. She thought about all the sacrifices her mother had made, for her, for their family, for a life that may not have been perfect but was filled with love nonetheless. And for the first time, she understood why her mom had chosen to keep certain parts of her past hidden. Not out of shame, but out of love, out of a desire to protect the present and cherish the future. As they packed their bags to leave the village, Maya felt a bittersweet mix of emotions. She was grateful for the journey, for the stories, for the chance to see her mother in a new light. But she also knew that the answers she sought came with responsibilities. To honor her mother's legacy, to carry forward the lessons she'd learned, and to find meaning in the fragments of the past. Little did she know, the biggest revelation was still waiting for her. The journey back from the village was quieter than the trip there. Maya sat by the window of the plane, staring out at the clouds as they drifted past like soft cotton balls floating in an endless blue sky. Her mind was heavy with everything she'd learned, About her mother, about Adrian, about the life Priya had left behind. Each story, each memory, felt like a thread weaving together a tapestry she hadn't known existed. But even as the picture became clearer, one question gnawed at her relentlessly. Who was her father? It wasn't something she'd thought much about growing up. Her stepfather, a kind, hard-working man who had always treated her like his own, was the only dad she'd ever known. He'd been there for every scraped knee, every school play, every late-night conversation when life felt overwhelming. She loved him deeply, and he loved her in return. But now, sitting next to Adrian, the man who had once shared her mother's heart, Maya couldn't ignore the nagging doubt that had taken root in her mind. Adrian seemed lost in his own thoughts too, his gaze fixed on the horizon outside his window. He hadn't pushed her to talk since they'd boarded the flight, respecting the silence that hung between them. But Maya could sense the tension radiating off him, as if he were waiting for something, or dreading it. Finally, unable to hold it in any longer, she turned to him. "Adrian," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something I need to ask you." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting nervously, in her lap. "When we were in the village and we found all those letters, and hearing everyone talk about how close you and my mom were." She trailed off, unsure how to continue. Adrian's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked away. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost cautious. "Go on." "Is it possible?" She swallowed hard, forcing herself to finish the sentence. "Is it possible that you're my father?" The words hung in the air between them, sharp and unyielding. Adrian didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, his eyes closing briefly, as if he were bracing himself for impact. When he finally opened them, his gaze was steady but conflicted. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "But I can't rule it out." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected it, feared it even, but hearing him say it aloud made it real in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she demanded, her voice rising despite her best efforts to stay calm. "I didn't want to upset you," he replied earnestly, "or give you false hope. Until we have proof, it's just speculation." Speculation. The word echoed in her mind, cold and clinical. This wasn't some abstract theory. It was her life, her identity, her family. How could he reduce it to mere guesswork? "I deserve to know the truth," she insisted, her tone firmer now. "If there's even a chance that you're my father, then I need to find out. For me, for my mom, for everyone involved." Adrian nodded slowly, his expression softening. "You're right," he said, "and I'll do whatever it takes to help you get answers. But understand, Maya, this isn't just about you. It affects your stepfather too, your whole family. We have to handle this carefully." She wanted to argue, to insist that the truth mattered more than anything else. But deep down, she knew he was right. This revelation, if it turned out to be true, would change everything. It wouldn't just redefine her relationship with Adrian. It would shake the foundation of the life she'd built with the people she loved most. Once they returned to New York, Adrian wasted no time setting things in motion. He arranged for a DNA test, explaining the process to Maya with a mix of professionalism and empathy. "It'll take a few days to get the results," he told her. "In the meantime, try not to dwell on it too much. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Easier said than done. The wait felt interminable, each day stretching longer than the last. Maya threw herself into work at the diner, hoping the routine would distract her, but her thoughts kept circling back to the same questions. What if Adrian really was her father? Would her stepfather feel betrayed? Would their family fall apart? Or would they somehow find a way to move forward? On the fourth day, Adrian called her. His voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of emotion. "The results are in," he said simply. "Do you want to meet so we can go over them?" Her stomach churned at the thought, but she agreed. They met at a quiet cafe downtown, far removed from the chaos of the city. Adrian slid a folder across the table toward her, his hands visibly trembling. "It's up to you whether you want to open it now or later," he said gently. "Take your time." Maya stared at the folder, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. After what felt like an eternity, she reached out and flipped it open. The words on the page blurred together, but one phrase stood out starkly. "Biological father confirmed." Her vision swam, and for a moment she thought she might faint. Across the table, Adrian let out a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging, as if the weight of the world had settled onto them. Neither of them spoke for several long minutes. There was nothing to say. Not yet, anyway. Finally, Maya managed to choke out a single word. "How?" Adrian ran a hand through his hair, looking older than she'd ever seen him. "I don't know all the details," he admitted. "But based on the timeline, your mom and I must have reconnected briefly during a trip she took to Europe years ago. It was unplanned, emotional, and clearly life-changing." Tears spilled down Maya's cheeks as the pieces fell into place. All those unanswered questions, all those moments when she'd felt like she didn't quite belong. It made sense now. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. "What happens now?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Adrian reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "We figure it out," he said firmly. "Together." For the first time since this journey began, Maya allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could. The days that followed the DNA test results were a blur of emotions for Maya. Everything she thought she knew about her life had been turned upside down. Her identity, her family, even the memories she held dear. All of it felt like shifting, sand beneath her feet. She couldn't stop thinking about her stepfather, the man who had raised her, loved her, and stood by her through every high and low. How could she face him now? How could she explain that the man sitting across from her at the kitchen table wasn't just some stranger, but her biological father? Adrian, too, was wrestling with his own storm of guilt and uncertainty. He had spent years building an empire, climbing to the top of the corporate ladder, yet none of those achievements prepared him for this moment. Being a CEO meant making tough decisions, analyzing risks, and staying composed under pressure. But this was personal. This was raw, and it scared him more than anything he'd ever faced in his career. "I don't want to disrupt your life," Adrian told Maya one evening as they sat together in his apartment. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. "You have a family, a good one. I won't interfere unless you want me to." Maya nodded, though her mind was racing. She appreciated his restraint, his willingness to let her take the lead. But deep down, she knew avoiding the truth wouldn't make it go away. Sooner or later, she would have to confront her stepfather and herself. It took her 3 days to gather the courage to talk to her stepfather. When she finally did, she chose a quiet Sunday afternoon when the house was empty, except for the two of them. They were in the living room, the faint scent of her mother's favorite incense lingering in the air. Maya fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, unsure how to begin. "Dad," she said softly, using the title she'd always called him. "We need to talk." Her stepfather looked up from the newspaper he was reading, his brow furrowing slightly. "What is it, Beta?" he asked, using the Hindi term for child that he'd always used affectionately. "Is everything okay?" Maya hesitated, her throat tightening. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head countless times, but now that the moment was here, the words felt impossible to say. Finally, she blurted it out. "There's something I found out about my real dad." His expression froze, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink around them. Then slowly, he set the newspaper aside and leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. "Tell me," he said simply, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. She told him everything. The diner, Adrian, the trip to India, the letters, the DNA test. With each word, she watched his face carefully, bracing herself for anger or disappointment. But instead, she saw sadness. a deep, aching sadness that made her chest tighten. When she finished, there was a long silence. Her stepfather stared at the floor, his hands clasped tightly together. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I suspected," he admitted. "Not Adrian specifically, but I knew your mother had a past I didn't fully understand. She never told me much, only that she'd loved someone before me, and that it ended amicably. I trusted her, and I trusted that our life together was enough." Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as she listened. "Does this change things?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Between us, I mean." He shook his head firmly, reaching out to take her hand. "No, Beta. You're still my daughter. Nothing will ever change that. I may not be your biological father, but I've loved you since the day you were born. That doesn't go away because of a blood test." Relief washed over her, but it was bittersweet. She hugged him tightly, feeling the weight of his unconditional love. Yet she also knew their relationship would never be the same. There was a new layer of complexity now, one they would both need time to navigate. Meanwhile, Adrian was doing everything he could to prove himself, not just to Maya, but to her stepfather as well. He reached out to him directly, inviting him to dinner to clear the air. It was an awkward meeting at first, filled with stilted small talk and forced smiles. But as the evening wore on, they began to open up, sharing stories about Priya and the impact she'd had on their lives. "She was remarkable," Adrian said at one point, his voice thick with emotion. "Strong, kind, selfless. I can see so much of her in Maya." Her stepfather nodded, a hint of a smile breaking through his guarded expression. "She was all those things and more. And she chose you to help bring Maya into this world. That means something." The comment caught Adrian off guard. He hadn't expected forgiveness or acceptance so soon, but hearing those words gave him hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to coexist as a blended family. Over the following weeks, Adrian made a conscious effort to be present in Maya's life without overstepping boundaries. He helped her pay off her mother's outstanding medical bills, funded her education, and supported her dream of becoming a writer. He even started attending family gatherings, awkwardly joining celebrations where relatives whispered behind their hands about the rich uncle who had suddenly appeared. At first, Maya felt guilty accepting his help. She worried it might seemed like she was choosing sides or betraying her stepfather. But as time went on, she realized Adrian wasn't trying to replace anyone. He was simply trying to make amends for years of absence. Slowly, she began to trust him, seeing glimpses of the man her mother must have fallen in love with all those years ago. Despite the progress, the road ahead wasn't smooth. There were moments of tension, misunderstandings, and lingering doubts. Adrian struggled with feelings of inadequacy, wondering if he'd ever truly earn Maya's trust. Maya grappled with conflicting loyalties, torn between the two men who had shaped her life in such different ways, and her stepfather wrestled with his own insecurities, questioning whether he was still enough for her. But through it all, they kept talking. They shared memories, asked questions, and listened to each other's perspectives. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Bit by bit, they began to heal, to build bridges where there had once been walls. One evening, as they sat together in Adrian's penthouse overlooking the city skyline, Maya turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think Mom forgave you?" she asked. "For leaving, I mean." Adrian sighed, his gaze distant. "I don't know," he admitted. "But if she did, it says more about her than it does about me. She was always better at letting go than I was." Maya smiled faintly, realizing how true that was. Her mother had carried so much grace, so much strength throughout her life. And now Maya was determined to honor that legacy, not by clinging to the past but by embracing the future, no matter how uncertain it might be. As the lights of the city twinkled below them, Maya felt a sense of peace settle over her heart. For the first time in a long while, she believed that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to move forward together. Years passed since that fateful day in the diner. Life had changed in ways Maya could never have imagined back then. What started as a simple question, "Why is my mother's picture in your wallet?" had blossomed into a journey of self-discovery, forgiveness, and healing. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were storms along the way, moments when old wounds reopened and doubts threatened to pull them apart. But through it all, they found a way to move forward, together. Maya stood backstage at a prestigious literary awards ceremony, her heart pounding like a drum. The room buzzed with excitement as writers, publishers, and critics mingled under crystal chandeliers. This was the culmination of years of hard work, a dream she'd almost given up on during the darkest days of her life. Her debut novel, Threads of Us, was nominated for one of the most coveted prizes in the industry. It was a memoir inspired by her journey, the secrets she uncovered about her mother, the bond she forged with Adrian, and the lessons she learned about love, loss, and resilience. As she adjusted the hem of her dress and took a deep breath, she glanced toward the audience. There he was, Adrian sitting near the front row, his expression calm but proud. Beside him sat her stepfather, the two men exchanging occasional smiles and nods. It was still surreal seeing them side by side, united not by blood but by their shared connection to her and Priya. Their relationship hadn't been easy to repair, but over time, mutual respect and understanding had bridged the gap between them. The announcer called her name, pulling her back to the present, and the winner of this year's Emerging Author Award is Maya Patel. The applause erupted around her as she stepped onto the stage, her legs trembling beneath her. She accepted the trophy with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the crowd, until they landed on Adrian and her stepfather. Both were beaming, their pride evident even from afar. For a moment she simply stood there, soaking in the magnitude of what she'd achieved, not just professionally, but personally. Finally, she leaned into the microphone, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "Thank you," she began, pausing to let the cheers die down. "This book wouldn't exist without the incredible people who shaped my life. First and foremost, my mom, Priya. She taught me strength, kindness, and the importance of holding on to hope, even when life feels overwhelming." She paused, her gaze softening as she thought of her mother. "I also want to thank my dad, the man who raised me, loved me unconditionally, and showed me what it means to be a family. You've been my rock through everything, and I'll forever be grateful for you." Her stepfather wiped away a tear, his smile widening as the audience clapped in support. Then Maya turned her attention to Adrian. "And to Adrian, thank you for stepping into my life when I least expected it. Thank you for helping me uncover pieces of my past and for showing me that family isn't defined by DNA alone. You've taught me that relationships take effort, patience, and a lot of forgiveness, but they're worth every bit of it." After the ceremony, Maya joined Adrian and her stepfather in a quiet corner of the venue. They hugged her tightly, congratulating her on the win and marveling at how far she'd come. As they talked, Maya reflected on the transformation they'd undergone as a family. It hadn't happened overnight. There had been countless conversations late into the night, heated arguments followed by heartfelt apologies, and moments when trust felt fragile and uncertain. But slowly they had rebuilt what had been broken, or perhaps created something entirely new. One of the biggest turning points came when Maya decided to write the book. At first she hesitated, worried about airing private matters in public. But both Adrian and her stepfather encouraged her, saying it was important to share her story if it could help others facing similar challenges. Writing became therapeutic. For her, a way to process her emotions and honor her mother's memory. By the time the manuscript was complete, she felt lighter, as though she'd finally released some of the burdens she'd carried for so long. "I can't believe we made it here," Maya said softly, looking at the two men beside her. "We've come such a long way." Her stepfather chuckled, patting her hand affectionately. "It wasn't easy, but look at us now. We're stronger because of it." Adrian nodded in agreement. "Families aren't perfect," he added. "They're messy, complicated, and sometimes painful, but they're also beautiful. and I think ours is proof of that. In the months that followed, Maya continued to thrive. Her book became a bestseller, resonating with readers who saw themselves in her struggles and triumphs. She traveled across the country for speaking engagements, sharing her message of hope and reconciliation. Along the way, she discovered a passion for storytelling that went beyond her own experiences. She wanted to amplify other voices, people whose stories deserved to be heard. Meanwhile, Adrian and her stepfather grew closer, bonding over their shared commitment to supporting Maya. They weren't best friends, nor did they pretend to be. But they respected each other, finding common ground in their love for her and their admiration for Priya. Together, they celebrated milestones, attended family gatherings, and even took trips together, a testament to how much they'd grown since those early days of tension. On one such trip, they visited the village in India where Adrian and Priya had grown up. Walking through the streets, Maya felt a profound sense of connection, not just to her roots but to the woman her mother had been before illness and hardship overshadowed her joy. Standing beneath the same mango tree where Priya and Adrian used to sit as children, Maya closed her eyes and whispered a silent thank you. Thank you for loving her, for shaping her, for giving me the strength to carry on. As the years rolled on, Maya realized that her journey wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about honoring the legacy her mother left behind. Priya had sacrificed so much to give her daughter a better life, and Maya vowed to live in a way that would make her proud. Whether it was through her writing, her relationships, or the values she instilled in future generations, she carried her mother's spirit with her wherever she went. One evening, as she sat with Adrian and her stepfather watching the sunset, Maya felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life hadn't turned out the way she'd expected. It had been harder, messier, and more unpredictable than she could have imagined. But it had also been richer, fuller, and infinitely more meaningful. You know, she said, breaking the comfortable silence. I used to think families were supposed to look a certain way, perfect, uncomplicated, predictable. But now I realize that's not true. Families are messy, yes, but they're also resilient. They adapt, they grow, and they find ways to stay together, even when it feels impossible. Adrian smiled, his eyes reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. Your mom would be so proud of you, he said quietly. Of who you've become, of the life you've built. Maya nodded, blinking back tears. And I'm proud of us, she replied, glancing at both men. For sticking it out, for choosing love over fear. That's the real legacy Mom left. Us. A reminder that no matter how complicated things get, love always finds a way. As the sky darkened and the stars began to twinkle above, Maya leaned back, feeling the warmth of belonging surround her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together, not as strangers bound by blood, but as a family forged through love, forgiveness, and the unshakable belief that second chances were always possible. Maya's journey wasn't just about uncovering secrets or piecing together fragments of her past. It was about growth, about learning who she was and who she wanted to become. As the years rolled by, she found herself standing at a crossroads, one foot planted firmly in the life she'd built and the other stepping cautiously into an unknown future. The memoir had been a turning point, but it was only the beginning. After the success of Threads of A, Maya became something of a public figure. People reached out to her from all walks of life, sharing their own stories of family struggles, identity crises, and second chances. Some wrote heartfelt letters, others sent voice notes or left comments on social media. Each message reminded her that she wasn't alone, that everyone carried scars, secrets, and unanswered questions. And while fame wasn't something she'd ever sought, she realized she had a responsibility to use her platform wisely. One day, as she sifted through emails from fans, one particular message caught her eye. It was from a young woman named Anjali, who wrote about growing up without knowing her father. Your book gave me hope, Anjali said, but I'm scared to ask my mom about him. What if it ruins everything? What if the truth hurts too much? Maya stared at the screen, her chest tightening. She remembered feeling that same fear. the paralyzing worry that searching for answers might destroy the fragile balance of her life. But she also knew what it felt like to live with unanswered questions, carrying the weight of uncertainty every single day. So she replied honestly. "Sometimes the truth does hurt," Maya wrote back. "But more often than not, it sets you free. You won't lose yourself by asking tough questions. You'll find pieces of yourself you didn't know were missing. Be brave. Your story matters." That exchange stayed with her long after she hit send. It made her reflect on how far she'd come since that night in the diner. Back then, she'd been afraid of the truth, afraid of what it might mean for her, relationships, and her sense of self. Now she understood that truth wasn't the enemy. It was the key to healing. As Maya continued to write and speak publicly, she began to think more deeply about legacy. Her mother's memory loomed large in her mind, not just as a source of inspiration, but as a reminder of the sacrifices Priya had made. Every time Maya sat down to create, she felt her mother's presence guiding her, urging her to tell stories that mattered. One evening, while sorting through old boxes in her apartment, Maya stumbled upon a bundle of photographs she hadn't seen in years. They were pictures of Priya, some taken during her childhood in India, others from her early days in America, and a few candid shots of her laughing with Maya when she was little. In each image there was a spark in Priya's eyes, a quiet strength that Maya had always admired but never fully understood until now. She called Adrian later that night, needing to share the flood of emotions these photos had stirred within her. "Do you remember this?" she asked, holding up a faded Polaroid of Priya and Adrian standing near a riverbank, their arms slung casually around each other's shoulders. They looked so carefree, so happy. Adrian chuckled softly over the phone. "How could I forget? That was the summer before I left for college. We thought we'd conquer the world together." "I wish I'd known her then," Maya admitted, her voice tinged with longing. "Not just as my mom, but as Priya, the girl who dreamed big and loved fiercely." "You did know her," Adrian said gently. "Maybe not as the person she was back then, but as the woman she became. And trust me, Maya, she was extraordinary. You carry pieces of her with you every day." His words brought tears to her eyes. For so long, Maya had struggled to reconcile the two versions of her mother, the vibrant young woman in the photographs and the weary caregiver she'd grown up with. But now, she saw them as one and the same. Priya's dreams may have shifted over time, her focus narrowing to prioritize her family, but her spirit had remained unchanged. She had poured everything she had into creating a better life for those she loved, and Maya vowed to honor that sacrifice in every way she could. In addition to writing, Maya started hosting workshops and community events aimed at helping people navigate complex family dynamics. She partnered with organizations that supported single parents, blended families, and children seeking connections with estranged relatives. Through these efforts, she met countless individuals whose lives mirrored parts of her own story. People searching for belonging, closure, and understanding. At one such event, a teenage boy approached her nervously after her talk. "I don't know my dad either," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mom says it doesn't matter, but sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel whole." Maya knelt down to meet his gaze, her heart breaking for him. "It's okay to wonder," she told him. "And it's okay to want answers. Just remember, you're already whole. You don't need anyone else to complete you, but finding out where you come from can help you understand who you are." He nodded slowly, a flicker of hope lighting up his face. Watching him walk away, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why she shared her story, not for accolades or recognition, but to remind others that they weren't alone. Back home, Maya's relationship with Adrian and her stepfather continued to evolve. They weren't perfect. No family was, but they had learned to lean on each other during tough times. When Maya faced writer's block or doubted her abilities, Adrian encouraged her to keep going, reminding her of the resilience she'd shown throughout her life. Meanwhile, her stepfather remained her anchor, offering unwavering support and wisdom whenever she needed it. On weekends, they often gathered at Maya's apartment for meals cooked from recipes Priya had left behind. Sitting around the table, sharing laughter and memories, they created new traditions while honoring the ones that had come before. These moments weren't just about food, they were about connection, about bridging the gaps between generations and forging bonds that transcended bloodlines. One afternoon, as they flipped through an old photo album, Maya paused on a picture of Priya surrounded by friends in the village. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "Mom used to say that family isn't just the people you're born to, it's the people who choose to stay." Her stepfather smiled, raising his glass of chai in agreement. "To family, then," he said warmly. "To family," Adrian echoed, clinking his cup against theirs. "To Mom," Maya added, her voice thick with emotion, "for showing us what it means to love unconditionally." As Maya drifted off to sleep, that night, she thought about how different her life was now compared to the chaotic whirlwind it had once been. She still missed her mother deeply, but the ache in her heart had softened, replaced by gratitude for the lessons Priya had taught her. Life was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes painful, but it was also beautiful, and Maya had learned to embrace all of it. In the end, she realized that the question she'd asked in the diner that fateful night, "Why is my mother's picture in your wallet?" had led her not just to answers, but to a deeper understanding of love, forgiveness, and the ties that bind us. Her journey wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace.